Welcome to regular movie review Thursdays, and today I just got back from watching 3:10 to Yuma. Now, 3:10 to Yuma is a 2007 film that came out a little while back in the day, before the 2010 hit. So it is a little bit old. It is a little bit past its time now, since now we're already now in 2012, which is sometimes that just mind blows me. But for what it is, I thought it was a rather decent film to watch if you haven't heard of it or haven't been able to come across it. I definitely would recommend that you watch it. But again, this is all going to have to depend on whether you like Western. Now, this movie is a Western movie. You basically got your good guys and your bad guys. And it kind of plays itself out that way. The style is very reminiscent of probably a lot of Westerns and the Western sort of genre, in that it kind of moves slow in order to kind of build tension, and then something happens, and then it goes slow, kind of slow again, and then it tries to build tension. And I think that's what a lot of Westerns try to do, because if you look at a lot of Westerns who emphasize sort of like the draw of guns and things like that, or like the tension of people coming across one another, you'll probably see that in this film as it tries to build some form of tension. You end up in this town who's pretty much just such an old Western town, and there's not a lot going on. So you do feel that sense of kind of removal, and how that kind of plays into a lot of how everything is sort of shot, and how the characters sort of emphasize their expressions, and how the people act and things like that. So again, it is reminiscent really of this Western genre. I don't think it's really trying to do anything really necessarily new with the genre. It seems like it's just trying to bring back that Western style, which I guess you could say a lot of Westerns, not a lot of Westerns aren't as popular as they used to be. The last big Western movie that came out was probably True Grit. And even that, it's not really a genre that's really emphasized a lot, like it originally was, with actors like John Wayne and things like that. So obviously the genre, I think, is kind of, I would say that it's kind of being pushed aside, because maybe a lot of people can't maybe necessarily appreciate it, or that they think that a lot of what Westerns have is pretty much just kind of a formula, and they can't really get out of that formula, of like criminals and cattle and farms and things like that. So I think that's maybe why a lot of people just don't really talk about Western genres, or really emphasize a lot of Western movies nowadays. Nowadays we tend to focus on things more of like sci-fi, superheroes, things like that. Things that are like really action-packed and that have maybe higher forms of technology, because in a lot of Western movies you obviously can't just pull out a spaceship, unless you want to see Cowboys vs. Aliens, which I heard kind of got really mixed reviews. But in that sense, it's almost like the Western genre is kind of not really talked about. So I thought, you know what, this is perfect time to watch this and see if I can get any value out of it. And I thought it was really interesting for what they did. The movie stars Russell Crowe as this criminal called Ben Wade, and he's like this famous criminal who's done a lot of crimes, like stealing, killing, all that stuff. And his band of criminals decide to raid on a carriage one day, and just basically take the money that the carriage has, and that's where he comes in contact with Christian Bale's character, and Christian Bale's also in this movie. and he plays Dan Evans, and he's basically a farmer, a struggling farmer who's in debt, and so he comes across this criminal, and then later on comes across him again in town when he goes to town and tries to beg the people who are in charge of the town to maybe give him more time so he can pay off the debt that he has and that he owes the town, so he can, raise his crops and take care of his family, because he has a family too. He has 2 sons and a wife. So already you can tell, and the movie tries to establish this difference between Christian Bale's character, Dan Evans, and Ben Wade, who doesn't need to really worry about, having a family or caring about really anybody else. He's just free to do whatever he wants because he's Ben Wade, and, he can get away with stuff because he's smart and all those things. And the movie kind of, in the beginning, tries to sort of establish that. And what ends up the contact between these characters again, and really what gets the plot going, is when Ben Wade and his band get caught. Now, technically, only Ben Wade is the only one that's captured. And he's supposed to go to a place called Yuma where he'll be hanged. And in order to get there, they need to go to a train that'll take him to Yuma. And that train is a little whiles away because they're in kind of the middle of nowhere western atmosphere. There's like literally nothing out there but rocks, and it's all desert. And so where they are and where they are in this particular town is just very deserted. So they have to go to another town that's miles and miles away so that they can put this criminal on, named Ben Wade, on this train so he can go and be tried and probably hanged. Because, again, he committed a lot of crimes, so he's pretty much established as someone who needs to pay some form of a price. And then the plot takes off from there, how they try to hide Ben Wade, and there's a bunch of other characters that go along with Christian Bale's character, Dan Evans, and now you're wondering how come Dan Evans decides to take this criminal? Like, what's the point? Well, Dan Evans is motivated by a sum of money that he'll get for putting that criminal on that train. And it's enough money for him to pay off his debt. And he's strongly motivated by this. I mean, he's really, he feels like that this is his duty and that this is his big break so that he can help care for his family. And then, you have the boy who also wants to kind of come along, and then how he kind of gets encompassed into the plot. And you also realize when the parts that are just more not so action-packed but more slow and trying to develop the characters, you see how Ben Wade is really different from Dan Evans in the way that they think. Ben Wade is pretty much the guy who thinks, yeah, I should just do whatever I want and I don't need to care about anybody. A man should do whatever he wants. I think he says that kind of like at one point, because, you should be, selfish and, you shouldn't really care about anybody else and blah, 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 blah. And then whenever Christian Bale kind of displays some form of compassion or something that is contrary to what Ben Wade feels, he's like, I don't like that about you, Dan. I don't like that. And you see how these two really different people have just really different lifestyles. And you'll also know how Dan Evans was actually injured during the Civil War. He got injured in the leg. And how that sort of factors into a lot of the way his character is sort of formed. He kind of goes around trying to do what he thinks is the right thing, whereas Ben Wade kind of goes around doing whatever he wants, and he doesn't care what anybody else thinks. So you really see these two different personalities kind of clash. And when Christian Bale's character, Dan Wade, does something that something that is kind of coalesced with what Ben Wade would do. Ben Wade's character, by Russell Crowe, kind of reciprocates in a positive way of that. He says, when Christian Bale is kind of saying, I'm, or shows a form of anger, Ben Wade kind of reciprocates positively to that attitude. But whenever Christian Bale's character kind of holds back, Russell Crowe's character goes like, hey, come on. And you see these two different personalities kind of coming together, and it's interesting to watch. And also I want to say is that the acting is fairly good. I think Christian Bale and Russell Crowe do a good job of capturing that Western atmosphere. I think they do a good job of trying to emphasize their characters. And whenever I watch Russell Crowe, it's almost like he doesn't really need to act. I mean, he can just kind of just flow with whatever character he's given and just kind of, I guess, maybe bring himself into that character. So you do get a sense that in this world that they create by establishing these characters. And I only talk about these two in particular is because they're just the main ones. They're the ones that really truly make this film. The other characters do a good job of moving the plot along. Again, they kind of are there to just move the plot. They don't really get really that much development. We see more of the development come through Christian Bale and through Russell Crowe. And you really do get behind what each character is going through. Like you kind of understand Ben Wade and the whole idea of, be able to do whatever you want and get away with everything and, live that like kind of lifestyle. And then you also understand Christian Bale's side, who's really trying hard to get this criminal to justice and who wants to have a stability for himself and for his family. So it's both a self-interest, but at the same time it's for the greater good of his family too. So you do kind of understand where both of these characters are maybe coming from. And the movie tries to establish that. And it really brings out, the genre, the whole concept of law and order and things like that, and it presents itself, I think, in an appropriate and good way. I guess I think that's really all I could emphasize, and also know that this is actually based upon a short story by Elmore Leonard by the same name, except when I looked it up on Wikipedia, it's spelled out like 310. In the movie, it just has the numbers, like I'll probably put in the title, it just says 310. So maybe the movie wanted to do that just to show that we're not really technically copying the short story author. But I could see why it could be considered a short story, because again, the movie tries to like draw things out a little bit more. And there may be at times where it feels kind of slow, but I think it's just that kind of Western slowness. It's that whole building of tension, like, even though there's really not a lot of like draws in this movie, like two people going up against each other and then, waiting and having tension and then finally pulling out the gun or anything like that. There's really none of really a lot of that, but it really gives that kind of air to a lot of other situations, and builds the tension that way. So, for the most part, it is a decent Western, I think. If you like Western, you'll probably really like this movie. If you're not a real fan of the genre, I could say that you may like it too, because again, it does have that Western feel to it, but it kind of tries to break away only to kind of establish maybe the characters, and use them to sort of emphasize the whole Western genre by, having a criminal, bringing a criminal to justice, yada, yada, yada. And it's kind of the same thing with, like movies like True Grit. This girl wants to go find justice for her deceased father. It's pretty much the Western genre just tries to emphasize this whole law and order concept. But again, if no other genre is going to do that but Western, then I guess have it just be Western films, because this is really what a lot of what Western films do. They just try to make this whole kind of law and order system, and they try to make it so that there's a criminal and that there's a hero. But I think it tries to not glorify the character. I don't think the movie was trying to glorify Russell Crowe's character, and I don't think Christian Bale was trying to be glorified in any way, shape, or form. I think they were just trying to establish them as just men who are different walks of life, and overall, it's a nice payoff. Definitely recommendable. If anything I've said in this review sounds interesting, I definitely recommend that you check it out. So I think that's really all I can say, but I will see you all later, and questions, comments, concerns, feel free to ask. And until next time,